Yo, what's up guys? Today we're about to overclock both of my AL0 Alephium home Asic miners. We're gonna do the modifications in this video. So we need a new power supply, thermal glue, chips to put on the Mosfets. We're gonna do all that in this video, full tutorial on how to do it. We're also gonna take a look at profitability before and after the overclocks. Is it worth doing the overclocks? Especially when you have to buy all these extra components for an already expensive miner. We're gonna take a look. We're also gonna look at the PSU recommendation from Greater Good Mining. This should be able to power both of these in an overclocked state for relatively cheap. So we're gonna test this out and see how it works. Real quickly guys, let's go over the parts you're gonna need to do these modifications. It's a little simpler than the similar Caspa mods. So first thing you're gonna need is a Drok PSU. This is a 480 watt PSU, and this is a little different than any PSU you've ever worked with before, but I'm gonna show you how to do it in this video. I'll put the prices on screen for everything. All these items are on Amazon, and I'll have a link to my storefront where you can buy all of these. This is a 2-pack of barrel plugs, so we're gonna be wiring this to this power supply. These are what's gonna actually power the miner themselves. Next thing you need is thermal glue to actually glue the heat sinks onto the MOSFET chips. You're gonna need 2 packs of MOSFET heat sinks. These are on Amazon as well. And then lastly, you're gonna need a power cord that you're gonna use to power this PSU. So for me, I'm running on 240 volts. So I have a C13, C14 power cable here that I cut the end off, and we're gonna be stripping these wires so that we can hook them up directly to here. And then this end will plug into my PDU. So this is all the supplies you'll need. Let's get into it. All right, first thing you need to do is take the screws off of both of the end panels and put these somewhere safe because we're not gonna be putting them back on. But if you ever want to resell your device, then you'd probably want to be able to put these panels back on for somebody. Unless they know that they're getting the overclocked edition, then it doesn't matter. So take off 4 screws on each side. Should be easy enough. And this mod is interesting because you don't need to put fans on the ends. You don't need to put an end shroud on. You don't have to get high speed fans to blow through the device. That's not necessary in this one because we're only overclocking about 10%. We're gonna be going from about 400 to 450-ish. And therefore the chips aren't getting that much hotter and we don't need to have a crazy fan blowing on them. Probably still not a bad idea, but I do not like the wattage, so I'm not gonna be doing that. Definitely be careful not to strip any of these screws. Some of them are really tight on there, and if you don't have the perfect size bit, it's easily possible to strip them. I had that issue the last time I modded some AL0s as well. Just gonna cut that sticker. All right, now that you've got the end panels removed, we need to take this plate off the back side because this is where we're going to put the chips onto the MOSFET. So you've got 6 more screws to remove on this side and another warranty sticker to get through. Peel that up. And keep screwing. All right, once you have all 6 of those unscrewed, now it's time to take this off. Now you want to try to be gentle to not rip the thermal pads, but really, I'm pretty sure it's just luck if you rip them or not. Be careful because the fans are still plugged in as well. So we're just gonna lightly pry this over here. Okay. Perfect. The thermal pads did not break, which is exactly what you want to see. And we can set this over here where we're not going to pull on the fan cords. All right, so these 4 chips right here are the 4 that we need to put thermal glue on, and then we need to put heat sinks on. And then that's about it. We're not going to be changing the pads. We're not going to be applying any thermal paste, just 4 chips, and then we're going to be putting this thing back together. So one thing you can also do is move these fans to the outside. These fans to the outside so more air can flow through there. And I want to look at this thing and see how much does that actually block, because it's kind of annoying to do that, but it does look like they block a significant amount of air, so I probably will go ahead and just unscrew those and put them on the back side. And again, this full tutorial I learned from Greater Good Mining, so if you guys don't know him, check out his channel. I'll have it linked down below, as well as his overclocking video. And later we're going to be using the PSU that he recommended, so I'll have that link down below as well, because if it works okay, that's a very good PSU deal. So let's go ahead and unscrew these 4 fans. All right, once you've got them unscrewed, then you want to take your fan shrouds, move them to the side, and stick your fans on the outside. You want to make sure that both of your fans are oriented in the same direction, the cables, that way they can reach when these are on the outside. And then you want to stick your grate back on. And the trick here that I learned from Greater Good as well is that you put 2 screws in from this side and 2 screws in from the back, and that's going to allow you to actually keep your heat fan cover on there, so you don't end up sticking your finger in there. The one other thing you want to do is don't screw these down too tight. I did that last time and one of my fans wasn't working, and the miner actually will not run if you do not have an operating fan, so you don't want to screw them down too tight. And I think I'm going to actually go grab a drill because it makes this process a little quicker. Okay, so like I mentioned, 2 screws on one side, 2 screws on the other side, and now you have your fans on the outside, and the cables will be able to reach down and get underneath to the fan headers. All right, so the next step is we need to apply our thermal paste, or our thermal glue rather, to our MOSFET chips. And this is a relatively simple process. Let's get that glue out. You just need a very small amount. I'm gonna put it directly onto the chips and then just stick the chips onto the MOSFETs. I'm gonna grab my heat sinks and scoot this a little bit out of the way for now. And I'm just gonna be using the old Blockbuster card to spread this glue onto these heat sinks. The thermal glue does come with a spatula, but I seem to have lost it, so this will do the trick. You really do not need a lot of this stuff. A little bit will do the trick. It doesn't seem like it's mixed very well. You can kind of see it's like clear on one side and glue on the other. I'm just gonna do that to it. That's definitely way more than I need, but that's fine. So I'm almost just gonna kind of rub these on there, see if that works. That's probably plenty. This is not as clean as I did it last time. It definitely makes it a lot easier if you have the spatula. But too much is not going to kill anybody, so I just want to make sure that they're positioned on there well, and then we'll let that glue do its thing. So in the previous video when I did this, I let these dry for 24 hours. That's the cure time, but I don't think I'm going to do that in this video because I determined that, I need to redo this one. I determined that they can heat, or they can cure while they are on a hot chip, so there's no reason I can't run this while they're curing. Okay, I'm gonna get a paper towel and clean this a little bit off. It's not gonna hurt anything, it's not conductive, but might as well clean the board up a bit. Okay, one more on this one. Just give it a dip. It's too much. Okay. All right, so this is what we're looking at. Definitely a bit more than you need, but rather have that than too little. And this one is good to go and to put back together. So the one final step we need to do is plug these cables into the fan headers before we stick this thing back on. So let's see if I can do that right here. Got that one, and then we need to get this one. This is the easier one. Okay, heat sinks are still in position, that's good. So now we can line this bad boy up and start screwing it in. You wanna make sure that you tighten these screws pretty tight, because this is what is actually going to compress this metal heatsink case into the thermal pads. And if you don't screw it down tight enough, then you're not going to get good compression and therefore good heat transfer onto the heatsink. And last thing I like to do is just route this little fan cable around some of these things, something like that. So now our cables are routed and this device is ready to get the overclock firmware. I need to be careful that I'm just let this run like this for a few days until that thermal glue totally cures. But otherwise, it should be fine curing while the heat sinks are actually on the hot chips, because they actually cure faster under heat. So this one's complete. Let's knock out the second and we'll get into the firmware. All right, I've got the second miner unscrewed. Let's pop this top off, hopefully not mess the thermal pads up. Oh, this one was bad. So, not the end of the world, but you can see the thermal pads definitely broke off here. And this was likely because this one had cooled down a bit since it had been mining. So it's not the end of the world, but we just need to make sure when we put this back on, that we align it perfectly so that the rip portions go back onto and fit perfectly where they were before. One thing that this does mean when the pads rip like this is it's a lot harder to get these fans off and on, because you don't really want to put these thermal pads on anything, but you can't really get around it. That's what you have to do. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll put the chips on this one as well. Once I get the fan tightened down, I like to blow on it just to make sure that the fan can still spin freely, because if you torque these down too much, it will not spin. So looks like we're good. Okay, time to do the heat sinks again. I'm gonna put a little bit more glue on here since that other glue has dried a bit since then, the last time I did this. Just do a dip, get some on there, and then stick on, and don't do that. I guess that's the good thing about putting too much glue on them, is if you drop them, then they still have plenty of glue once you pick it back up and put it on the chip. Okay, that is the 4 chips done. And now we just need to hook our fans back in, and hopefully we can get these thermal pads back into a half decent state. If we line up the screw holes fine, then they should, just the rip parts will go back into those spots. I'll monitor the temperatures on this one, because if it's not performing as good as the other one, then maybe I will need to go back in and replace these pads. Hopefully not, and I think they should be fine, but they did rip pretty bad, which is unfortunate. So let's get these plugged in. So looking at the rip, it's gonna go like this, which unfortunately means I put these fans on backwards because the cords need to be going down. It wouldn't matter if the pads didn't rip, because then I could put this either way, but it does matter since the pad's ripped. So let me go ahead and switch those around. Good to go now. Now we just need to screw this thing down, make sure we got good compression. I did lose a couple pieces of thermal pads. I debated on putting thermal paste down, but we'll see how the temperatures work. I think it should be just fine. There's still a lot of thermal pad that's left. But maybe if you guys are doing this, open it right after it comes off heat so that you can pull it off without ripping those thermal pads. So let's get this screwed back in. Okay, this one is now complete as well. So now let's discuss the power supply that we're gonna be using and get that all hooked up. Okay, so this is the power supply we're using, the Drok. It's 480 volts. How this works here is that we've got a V plus, a V minus. This is where we're gonna be putting our barrel plugs. And then this is what you're actually plugging into the wall, your ground, your neutral, and your load. For 240 volts, you're gonna have 120 volts on each line, the white and the black, but those just still go to the neutral and the load. Very important, there's a switch on the side here that you switch between 110 volts or 220 volts, in our case 240. You wanna make sure that's correct so you don't fry anything, and definitely before I plug these into the miner, I'm going to just turn this on and plug it into the PDU and make sure everything's okay. That way I don't end up shorting my miner or doing something like that. So what we need to do here is actually put our barrel plugs in here, and we'll do that first, and then I'll need to strip back this wire a bit more and trim off the sheathing of the internal wire so that we can put that under the plugs as well. So let's do that now. We'll start with the barrel plugs. So we'll unbox those, and it looks like these are already stripped a good amount for us, so that's good. So this one I'm just gonna put on these two terminals here, which will be the V minus and V plus. Screw those down, and then the second one I'm gonna put on the outer ones of that. So that's good enough right there. I'm gonna go ahead and tighten those down. You want to make sure this is nice and tight. Do the same for the red. Okay, give them a little plug when you're done. Just make sure they're not going anywhere. That seems perfectly fine. Let's unbox our second barrel plug. Once again, the links for all these will be in the description. This was relatively cheap, definitely cheaper than using 2 laptop power supplies if you go this route, because you only need to buy this and the 2 barrel plugs. So for this one, I'm gonna need to split this sheathing a little more so I can get these wires out. So let's see here. I just put a new razor blade on here, so it should be pretty sharp. Let's see if that's enough to pull them apart. Yes, it is. And then I'll go ahead and cut this extra off. Okay. And then once again, red on one side and black on the other. Okay, it's nice and tight, and then black over here. Okay, so our 2 barrel plugs are now wired in. Now we need to split our 240 volt cable. So this is going to be a little more difficult since this is pretty thick, but shouldn't be too big of an issue. Now you want to make sure you don't nick any of the internal wires, so we'll see if I did. We'll open that up. Looks like they're all right. Pull those out. Not sure what this chalky substance is in there. Is that going to be long enough? Should be, but I might bring this just a tad bit longer down. A sharp razor blade definitely makes this a bit easier. Okay, got those out. Now we can cut this off. All right. And now you need to grab a pair of electrical pliers and we're gonna strip these. You wanna make sure you get the right gauge. I'm not exactly sure, so I'm just gonna start big, and you definitely do not need to strip a lot of this off. I think that's too big. Just as much as was stripped off on the barrel plugs. So that is probably enough. Let's see. I think I'm going to get just a tad bit more off of that. Okay, yeah, that should be perfect. So we'll do that on the next ones. And you can go ahead and twist these too, just to make sure everything stays together. And then let's do the ground. Okay. All right, so like we said, the green will go to the ground. So we'll do that one first, and then the other ones, the white and black, will go to the negative and the load. First. Stuck on there good. Neutral white. And lastly, the load black. Okay, so this is all wired up to go now. We've got our 2 barrel plugs, and then we've got our 240 volt PDU cable plugged into here. So the last thing to do is to go plug this into the PDU, and then this thing will control the voltage, which will show right here. We want it set around 19.8 from the different laptop power supplies. They're between 19.5 and 20. So I'm just gonna split the difference at 19.8, which you adjust with this knob. So we can flip this little shield down, and let's go plug this into the PDU. And if everything looks good, then we will plug in our AL0s and get to the firmware portion of this. All right guys, I've got this plugged in. Nothing exploded, so that's a good sign. So you can see we're at 17.9, and I want to adjust this to 19.8, and it is very touchy. The smallest little movement will increase it. So let's get it to like 19, that's 0.6. There we go, 19.8. All right, now I guess we just plug in our barrel plugs and hopefully everything goes good. I'm gonna go ahead and get these other power supplies out of the way to clean this up a little bit. And then we will plug in our Ethernet and plug in our new barrel plugs. And I almost forgot, I need to make sure I'm holding these, or I'm setting these like this for now so that those heat sinks can dry. That's very important. So I'm gonna have to scoot this PSU back a little bit, and then hopefully these can fit on their sides. Looks like it shouldn't be a problem. So Ice River says you want to do Ethernet first. So 1 Ethernet. 2 Ethernet, and then we get our new barrel plugs, and let's plug those in. Let's monitor those for a second and make sure that everything looks okay. I did see a little bit of a spark when I contacted the new barrel plug to the barrel plug thing, but I think that's normal. They both are showing the normal lights. In a minute, they should start flashing green. If you guys notice, I did get a 8-port Linksys switch, so I now have 4 short Ethernet cables that are all going to all my little miners up here, and eventually to this PC once I get that built. But so far everything is looking good. So in a minute we're gonna hop onto the computer and start setting the PB overclocks. It's a little more difficult than T-Swift overclocks because you need to manually set the different parameters like the voltage and the core offset. But that's a good sign that that one's mining because that one was the one that slightly sparked. So that's a good sign, and that one is now mining too. All right, guys, so I went ahead and unplugged every single thing that's on the 240 volt PDU, and it looks like the two miners on stock are pulling 235. I really need a better way to get wattages of just one miner so I don't have to unplug every single thing. I probably need to run another smart outlet like this, but for now, that's our stock. All right, guys, let's get into this. So one thing I just wanted to mention is that it's a new day. Make sure that you let your heat sinks dry for like 24 hours before you actually do the overclocks. I reached out to Greater Good Mining, and that's what he did. He didn't just apply the overclocks right away. He waited a day, but still running them stock. But they are dry now, so we can go ahead and get into it. I'll have a link down below to this GitHub page that has the PBFarmer overclock firmware here. So you're going to download that. So now go to your miners, and we're just going to go to firmware upgrade, and then you're going to select the file. This one right here, and then open and update. I'm going to go ahead and do this on both miners. So it looks like this succeeded on this one. Yes, we want to restart the machine, and yes, we want to restart the machine. So I'll check back in a second. All right, guys, both of them are on this new login page, which I can only assume is the new PBFarmer firmware. So let's go ahead and log into both of these, accept the software disclaimer, and it looks like we are in. So what's different here? You have a lot of new charts, which they're obviously not populated yet, but the main thing that we are interested in is if you go into miner, understand, you have these offsets, and this is what's going to allow you to actually overclock the firmware. And I think it's capped right now at 12%. So when you have a 1% pool fee or a 1% dev fee, the max that you're going to get out of this is 11% more yield. But at the cost of what voltage? That's what we're going to figure out. If you go to the PBFarmer and you go to, first of all, there's a ton of good information in here. I already mentioned that. But if you go to usage tips, there's a great paragraph right here on how you actually want to do this overclocking. It says that this right here is very important. So if you take your miner and you give it a 10% boost, so you can see here that 25 megahertz is 4% boost. So I'm not going to submit this, but if you gave it a, let's say 10% boost, then you should see a 10% boost in hash rate. So from 400 gigahash to 440 gigahash. And if you don't see that 10% boost, it means that your voltage is low. And so you should bump up the voltage in increments of 2. And basically, you want to increase the voltage until you're seeing that 10% increase, and that's where you want to stay. So it's going to take a long time to do this. Everything appears to be mining fine. We've got accepted shares, so we can go ahead and get started with overclocking these. So in Greater Good Mining's video, and I'll pull his video up real quick. So in Greater Good Mining's video, he set his to 7516. But the documentation specifically says don't just immediately jump to 75. You want to kind of go in increments. So I think I'm going to go ahead and set both of these to 56. And that is an 8% increase. So we should see an 8% increase in our hash rate. And unfortunately, you have to wait like 30 minutes to actually see if it's reliably up or not. So I'm just going to go ahead and set this as a base, and then we'll come back in 30 minutes, see what we're looking like, and then tweak from there. This is likely going to be a multi-day process to get these where we want them to be. But let's go ahead in 56. The cool thing about this is that we do not need to actually restart the miner. This is going to do this over time. So what's interesting, I just realized, is that it doesn't have my pool and wallet anymore. So I need to actually put those back in. All right, I went ahead and added my pool back in. I guess that makes sense. When you clear the firmware, it's gonna clear all that information. So make sure you put your pool back in here. I recommend K1 pool. It is my favorite pool for these Asic coins and a lot of GPU mining coins as well. Specifically because you can go to this dashboard here and see your earnings for every single day in dollars. So $4 today, $5.63 yesterday. That's what I like about K1 pool, especially if you're mining a ton of different coins. So I'll have a referral link for that down below. But getting back into this, let's go ahead and set our overclocks for the first time. So we said 50 and 6. Let's go ahead and save that. Okay, and let's go ahead and save this other one, 50 and 6. And then normally you wouldn't have to restart, but since I also changed the pool, I am going to go ahead and restart the miner. So up here we can do reboot, and we'll do that for both devices, and then we'll confirm that we are mining on K1 pool when they come back up. All right guys, I've been doing some testing. I kind of broke my rule a little bit. I ended up just going up to the 75, but I overdid the voltage so that I wasn't going to be undervolted at any point. So both of them right now are sitting at 75 megahertz on 20 millivolts. That's for both of them. And you can see on my stats right here, I'm getting 455 on the 30 minutes, and the 2 hour I'll need to check in 2 hours, but both miners are basically the exact same. Refresh this one. 448. This did say 455 a second ago, so it's obviously still coming in, but both of them are above 400, which is what we want to see. And also, so 75 megahertz is 12% increase on the base clock. So we want our hash rate to be exactly 12% increased. And if I do a calculator real quick, 400 divided by 455, that is dead on 12%. So that means it's performing good. We have enough voltage to do the 12% overclock. Now from here, what I'll likely do is incrementally drop down my voltage offset. So I'll maybe do 18 and then 16 and just see how low I can actually get it while maintaining stability. But for right now, I'm going to let it get to 2 hours and make sure the 2 hours looks okay around that 455 mark. Because as you can see, the 30-minute has changed from 455 to 443 just since we started filming this. So the 2 hour is really the one you want to use. As far as temperatures, we got 68 as the max on this one for the board temperatures. This is the one you want to pay attention to. This is the one that we put the heat sinks on. And on this one, we're at 74. So a little bit higher, but still well within. The fans are at 100%. And on this one, 100% as well. One thing you do want to do is to set your target temperature fans for the fan configuration. I actually have two different setups because one of them was running a little bit hotter. So this one is 70 for the chimp temp, 65 for the board temp, and 30 for the min speed. And this one is 75, 70, 20. So just dial it in until you think the temperatures are where you want them. If they're already going at 100% fan speed anyway, then changing those isn't going to do a lot of difference. So let's talk about power usage. I just ran downstairs to check power, and if you remember, we were at 230 watts or 235 watts as the stock for these two miners, so about 117 watts each. And right now we are running at exactly 285 watts, so 142 watts each. So for a 10% increase in hash rate, we're getting about, I don't know what that is, 20% increase in wattage. Without actually analyzing those numbers, it's hard to determine if it's worth it, but guess what? I made a spreadsheet. So let's determine, is it worth it to overclock your KS0 Ultras? This should answer that question for you right now. So right up here, I've got Alephium's price is set to $1.59. And then we have the stock hash rate and the overclocked hash rate. So we'll put stock right here and then overclock. The power usage for each, 117 watts versus 142. The cost of the miner. So for stock, I paid $820 for these devices. And for the overclock, it only adds $30 extra, which is a big factor here. It's much cheaper than a Caspa overclock. So keep that in mind. Now, if you're only doing one device, it is going to be a bit more expensive. So if you look over here, the barrel plug is $5, the heat sinks are $7.5, and the power supply divided by 2 is $20. But if you only have one miner, then the power supply is $40, which would mean for one miner, your cost up to overclock is $50, but if you have two, it's only $30. So moving on, with current difficulty, your Alph per day on stock is 1.2, and it's 1.36 for the overclock. And then you're paying an extra 6 cents in power per day for the overclock. And profit, you're profiting an extra 20 cents per day at current prices with the overclock, which is going to save you at today's date 40 days on ROI, which in my opinion is worth it. Especially, let's say that we think Alph is going to go to $5 eventually. We can change that up here, and you can see it's only going to save you 12 days at that point, but still that's about 10% faster ROI if you look at these numbers. So I think it's personally worth it. You're going to get more yield right now immediately while difficulty is relatively low. Not a lot of people have started mining it. Hash rate is climbing quick though, so you want to do this ASAP if you are going to do it. Also, to think about in the future, these overclocks may go up. You might be able to overclock 20%, 30%. And if that's the case, you already have all the hardware. It's just probably as easy as throwing a fan on it and then changing the firmware. So in my opinion, it is very worth it. You're getting about a 10% quicker ROI from these calculations for the price of $30, which is, in my opinion, very worth it. I hope you guys like this video. Make sure you're mining to K1 pool. If you're not, I got my link down below, and I'll see you guys in about a month. We'll do a little bit of a profitability review on these and see how close we are to hitting that break even. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and hitting that like button on the way out. Peace.